Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to It Says What? It Says What? Where JW3 and Limud come together to bring you unexpected and poignant Jewish content from across the Jewish community every week before Shabbat. I'm Joe Hyman, JW3's young programmer, and JW3, for all those who don't know, is the UK's Jewish Community and Arts Centre. We are partnering to bring you this program with Limud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. Our building is closed, as you know, but we're very much online, very much open. This series will ask educators, artists, leaders from across the Jewish community in the UK and abroad to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. So to ask your own questions about what we'll be talking about today with Rabbi Debbie YoungSomers, please comment on our live feed or in the webinar if you're attending in the webinar, and we'll take those questions towards the end. I am delighted to welcome Rabbi Debbie YoungSomers, who's part of the rabbinic team at Edgware and Hendon Reform Synagogue. She is a passionate advocate of interfaith dialogue, Jewish craft and ritual. She's involved in developing education and liturgy for the Mikvah Project UK, which is a project opening up the Mikvah ritual immersion experience for more than the current offering at the moment. She regularly broadcasts on the radio and has been published, writing in a variety of topics, from Jewish-Christian dialogue to Mikvah rituals. Welcome, Rabbi Debbie. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here, back in my loft upstairs.
Exactly, in the virtual JW3 space. Good to have you.
Thank you. Are we good to go?
Yeah, tell us, what are you going to be talking about? What's the text about? What are you thinking?
Before we dive into the text, Joe, I really want to hear from you. When you hear the word mikvah, what are your initial associations?
Mikvah, interesting. For me, I have two associations. The predominant one actually isn't. I guess the predominant one is about men. It's about kind of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, really religious men going to the mikveh. It's about kind of uncomfortable experiences, either on an Israel tour or before Rosh Hashanah, kind of, oh, I'm going to the mikveh, and there's this awkward experience where you see, the manager of Kosher Kingdom at the mikveh. So there's that kind of uncomfortable, what's going on? There's a naked man here, but also, I guess it's something that was very secret when it came to women. So it's some place that women went when they, had a period. Something about marriage. I once saw a friend and their wife kind of at shul after going to Mariv with my dad once, and it was very hush hush. Oh, don't speak to them. That kind of thing. So there's a lot of kind of hushed, quiet secrecy, shame around it, which is interesting.
That's so brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just before you go on, I think our audience will benefit actually from knowing what is a mikveh for those who don't know what it is.
So a mikveh is literally a gathering of water, and according to Torah, there are two types of mikveh you can have. One is a sort of natural flowing body of water, so something like a spring, a river, the sea would count, but not the Dead Sea. Has to be mayim chayim, which is living water. Plus, trying to immerse in the Dead Sea, really not recommended. Be really disgusting. All that salt. Trying to immerse in the sea generally is quite unpleasant. I've done it a few times, but the Dead Sea, very, very hard. And the other kind is essentially a well or a dug pit of water, that kind of gathering of water. And that's the kind that we're probably more used to in the UK, would be a dug pond, a dug well. But because it needs to be mayim chayim, in the way that most mikvaot today are built, there are tanks of rainwater that are collected that kiss the water of the mikveh to make it a kosher mikveh, where there's living water present, not just the tap water. And it's there's a huge amount of symbolism associated with mikveh and what it is. But I think for me and for the Mikvah Project, what we really want to help the community enjoy is the fact that the mikveh is a ritual of transformation. It's, as you said, at high holy days, big moments in the year, marriage, even a menstrual cycle is part of the transformation that our bodies are going through all the time. But there are lots more broader applications today. There are liturgies out there for gender transitioning. I've worked with people on liturgies for recovering from a childhood abuse, finishing chemotherapy, divorce, ordination, lots of moments of transformation. So what we're going to do today is look at one of the kind of first texts looking at this stuff. And the reason I chose Leviticus 15 and not all of it because it is too long, but when I usually ask this question about what do you associate with mikveh, the vast majority of answers tend to be around that stuff you were saying to do with shame, women's bodies, dirt, impurity. It's really kind of the furthest end away from what mikveh should be and could be. It's really the most amazing tool for our spiritual toolbox, if you like. So shall we look at the text?
Yes, let's look at the text. Thank you. Here we go.
So this is part of a longer text, and there is a bit before and a bit after, but I've tried to squeeze out the middle bit so we get a bit of everything in there. And I'm afraid if you're eating your lunch, we are going to be talking about bodily emissions. So apologies in advance. But essentially, the first case that we're talking about is a bloke. This is a man who has a discharge, and he becomes clean of his discharge. He counts off 7 days for his cleansing, washes his clothes, and bathes his body in fresh water, and then he is clean. If we had read the sort of lines just before this, we would understand that this is a guy who's having some kind of discharge that's not healthy. He's not very well, some kind of VD or infection. And what I think is really fascinating is we have this isolation period, right? We've all been in lockdown. This guy who's not well, he is quarantined. When he's better, he still has to wait 7 days before returning to the community. And I think it's a really important thing to highlight, because what I believe we're looking at is a series of public health discourses from the Torah, right? If you are not very well, if you have sara'at, right, which is that flaky skin disease that we saw a few parashiot ago, then please don't come and hang out at the temple. Please don't join thousands of other people in a space that you might infect them, right? This is language that we're now quite used to in COVID-19 era. This is public health stuff. Stay away, keep everybody else safe. And when he is better, on the 8th day, he takes 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and comes before the Eternal at the entrance of the tent of meeting and gives them to the priest. The priest shall offer them, the one as a sin offering and the one as a burnt offering. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his discharge before the Eternal. So, Joe, if he's offering a sin offering, what does that imply about his discharge?
Well, it seems that there's something sinful there and something wrong that he's doing, and hence maybe the source of this shame.
Right, so he's obviously done something wrong to deserve the disease that he's picked up. Now, when it's a venereal disease, we could maybe be more specific about what he might have done wrong. But theologically, this is a din of Torah that, it doesn't sit so comfortably for me today, but it's the sense that if you suffer illness, there is a reason for it. Now, it's theologically not where I would go, but it's important in trying to understand where the rest of the text goes, in understanding what our bodily emissions are all about. But we do see here, he's cleansing, he washes his clothes, and he bathes his body in fresh water, in Mayim Haim. He's described as Tuma. He's a Zav, that's the category he falls in, and he's described as Tuma, which is the category of people who are excluded from temple worship. And you can fall into that category if you have, as we said, sara'at, if you have if you have these bodily emissions, all sorts of, and it's really, lots of scholars have expressed it this way. It's tied up intimately with the sacrificial system and the idea that you can only participate if you're well. So that's the first case that we have. This is our Zav, quickly followed by our next case, which is quite different. When a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water and remain unclean until evening. All cloth or leather on which semen falls shall be washed in water and remain unclean until evening. And if a man has carnal relations with a woman, they shall bathe in water and remain unclean until evening. So this is our second case. What is happening to him, Joe? Is he ill?
This seems a lot more run-of-the-mill, normal life situation.
Right, and very normal life, we might imagine. There are customs in very Orthodox communities that men will immerse very, very frequently, almost daily. And that is a continuation in some part of this idea. Now, there's no sin offering, so he's not ill. There's nothing wrong with him. It's not a bad thing. It's a natural thing. It's completely normal to have a seminal emission. And we might imagine biblically that he's doing that quite often, whether with a partner or just a wet dream. It would put him into the same category, or maybe just by himself having some fun. It also suggests something about the semen itself, because when semen touches other things, this transmission of something happens too, including to a woman. Now, one of the fascinating things in Judaism is that something that is holy can make you tuma. We know that texts are holy because they render the hands unclean. And I wonder if there is something about the holiness of both the seminal emission and maybe of the sex act, the orgasm. Maybe this stuff is seen as holy, and that there needs to be some kind of separation, some kind of honoring of that moment with washing, with immersion. It's also just nice to your next partner or the same partner. It's a way of making sure people keep clean. It's public health discourse again. And actually, interestingly, when you look at discourse around women's bodies, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that women who are able to wash post-coitus can maintain sexual health much better. But that's another issue for another day. Okay, so then we've had our man. And now we're going to move on to, oh, you've moved it. When a woman, where are we? When a woman has a discharge, her discharge being blood from her body, she shall remain in her impurity 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Anything that she lies on during her impurity shall be unclean, and anything that she sits on shall be unclean. Anyone who touches her bedding shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until evening. And anyone who touches any object on which she has sat shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until evening. Be it the bedding or the object on which she sat, on touching it he shall be unclean until evening. And if a man lies with her, her impurity is communicated to him. He shall be unclean 7 days, and any bedding on which he lies shall become unclean. So, what's going on for this woman?
This feels once again kind of like something normal, something regular.
Yep. So she's having her period.
There seems to be a lot more laws. Yeah, she's having her period, and there seems to be a lot more laws around it.
So that's really interesting. There actually are quite a lot of echoes of what goes on for a man in terms of what it touches, if the semen falls on it, if you have sex with him, the communication of this tuma, this impurity, which isn't a great word because tuma doesn't have a negative sense of dirt, right? Feces are not tuma. It's not about being unclean and dirty. It's a very specific thing about whether you can come to the temple. So here we have a woman who's having a natural period. There's no sin offering. There's no negative associations with it. But how long is she separated out for?
So is it 7 days?
7 days total, which is quite important, because we're looking at the biblical understanding of this right now, and to understand that in the rabbinic tradition that shifts a little bit. So a woman has a normal menstrual emission, she's completely healthy. Again, maybe there's something holy about this. Blood is holy according to Torah. Maybe her blood is holy and this separates her out. When I first read this, I was like, that's really unfair. The guy with the natural emission is only unclean until evening. She's got 7 whole days. And then you start to realize a seminal emission lasts seconds. A menstrual emission lasts days. So it does make a certain amount of sense that this lasts longer, but it's a maximum of 7 days that she's tameh. And her partner, if he has sex with her, there is a way of fixing it. It's not encouraged, but you can fix it. And a few chapters later, you start to see much stronger prohibitions against sex with a menstruating woman. But at this point, actually, it's saying, if it happens, here's the solution, which is quite interesting to see how the different chapters deal with it. I think we're seeing what we call a chiasm in Torah, which is a poetic reflection. So the first chap was sick, the second chap's healthy, this woman's healthy, completely normal, isolated for 7 days, and then she comes back. But if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days and not at the time of her impurity, or when she has a discharge beyond her period of impurity, she shall be unclean, tuma. And though at the time of her impurity, as long as her discharge lasts, any bedding on which she lies while her discharge lasts shall be for her like bedding during her impurity, and any object on which she sits shall become unclean, as it does during her impurity. Whoever touches them shall be unclean. He shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until evening. When she becomes clean of her discharge, she shall count off 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. So this woman is a zava. The first guy was the zav, she's the zava. When the zava finishes bleeding, in other words, when she's well again, she still has to wait an extra 7 days after her illness to be brought back into the community. Now, the next bit of the text, which we haven't put in, is that she offers a sin offering. So this is, again, illness, bad, not what should be happening normally. All these restrictions. I think for me, I'm going to try and wrap it up so there's time for people to ask questions. What's really key is that, first of all, this is about men and women both entering into these states on a totally normal way and in an unhealthy way, and that those two things are different, and that the Torah understands public health and wants to honor it, that the Torah understands the cycles of our bodies and the holiness of it and wants to honor that. We also actually see that the women's suggestion around mikvah is much less. It's really the men who are being offered the mikvah. Some would argue it's implied for the women because of the chiasm, because of the poetic balance. But it's we also see that the 7 days post bleeding, which is how today we understand nida to be counted, and nida is a menstruant, that's actually a zava, that's a sick person. And that's come into the tradition because in the Talmud, we're told that we don't know anymore the difference between a nida and a zava, which is really challenging, actually. I think the conservative movement in America has produced a teshuvah arguing that we really should observe nida as a 7-day period total, because women do know what's going on with their bodies. We do know what's nida and what's zava. And I love that Judaism kind of continues to grapple with that and try to understand how we make that meaningful. I could go on forever about how women have used these texts and manipulated them through Jewish history to really make nida and mikvah their own. But I would love to know if anyone else has questions about these bizarre, but also I think really healthy texts about protecting the community, but also honoring our bodily cycles.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to ask in the webinar itself or on YouTube or on Facebook, many different areas. One question that I'm going to throw out first. I mean, kind of initially a comment, which is this text is so matter of fact, and that shame that we spoke about at the beginning is kind of taken away by this text in some way, because it's like, yeah, there are this bodily mission and that bodily mission, and, you know, as a kid, you hear whispers of these things, and it makes you uncomfortable. But it's nice to see that the Torah, nice is not the word, is it's amazing to see that the Torah is talking about this in such an honest and open way, with free of shame. It's actually a lot of sanctity in this conversation.
And it's really interesting, actually, because we often talk about Judaism as being very sex positive. Right, we don't have celibacy, and it's good to enjoy sex, and, you know, we joke about mitzvah night on Friday night, all those sorts of things. But actually, mikvah, you go to the mikvah as a niddah in the evening, because that's how we count time. But it's also, if you look at some of the medieval texts, it's very clear that there's a sense that you should preserve a couple's privacy. People shouldn't know that it's mikvah night, because then they know that you're going to be having fun and having sex, and that should be private between a man and a woman, which, or you know, this is very heteronormative stuff, we know, obviously, although there are really interesting movements for non-heterosexual couples to engage with this stuff. But yeah, the idea of preserving the couple's privacy. But I think you're right, that has meant that we've grown shame around it, that we hide it, that we and I think that's true about periods generally. If you talk to a lot of kind of modern thinkers about women's bodies and how do we do this stuff, you know, the joke is, if men menstruated, there'd be so much more research into period pain and all that sort of stuff. But actually, we're not encouraged to talk about it. We're supposed to go rollerblading and skydiving, according to the adverts of my childhood.
Yeah, no, completely. I completely agree with that, and it's really wonderful to see the contrast of that at least in the raw text of it. We've got a question from Kevin in our audience, and it's really interesting. It's talking about the temple. You mentioned that tameh, impurity, is associated with temple worship. So how does the fact that there's no temple anymore affect how we see this halakhically? How do we bring it into the modern day, and why is it still important?
Brilliant. It's the best question. And I think it's really important for how we understand mikvah and its purpose. So without a temple, there is no relevance really to these ideas of tuma and tahor, because we're not excluded from temple worship. And actually, we're all tumat met, which is impure by contact with the dead. If you were born in a hospital, you're tumat met. If you've ever been to a hospital, you're tumat met. If you've ever sat with a body, you're tumat met. And it travels very, very simply and easily. And that can't be solved without the temple. So you don't ever emerge from a mikvah tahor, pure. But what we see happening is that the rabbis start to understand that the laws around niddah, because of these later chapters that prohibit much more strongly sex with a menstruating woman, or with a zava also, the rabbis start to understand, well, there must be another reason for this. And Rabbi Meir in Niddah 21b talks about how it's really there as a marital aid. It's there to keep you interested in each other, because when you're denied to each other for a period, it builds the tension. And actually, looking at modern psychoanalysis, a lot of couples therapy involves activities that sort of mirror this. But I think Kevin's question is perfect in the sense of, if we are not holding by these ideas of purity and impurity, what can the mikvah mean for us? Actually, I would say if we're not holding by the ideas of purity and impurity, it just elevates the mikvah to being what so many of us need it to be, which is this ritual of transformation, a ritual of really sacred moments. And it's one of the rare places in Jewish life that you can go where it's not about family, and it's not about food, and it's not about big crowds of people or even small crowds of people. It is you at your most vulnerable, naked and clean before your God, so that you can really process your life, process your spirituality, and be quiet for yourself. So one of the first rituals that I wrote around the mikvah was for my own infertility journey, and actually Nida became a reminder each month of that journey and of that pain, and mikvah was this place that I could go and take that pain and process it each month. And I actually realized this week in another mikvah class that wasn't an opportunity that was given to my husband, that just didn't exist, and I took for granted that I needed it and used it, but actually realizing he didn't have that, which I think is a shame. And one of the things the Mikvah Project wants to enable is for men and women to all feel, and non-binary people, for everyone to feel that the mikvah can be theirs for whatever they need it for, because it's not about purity. No one is going to no one is filthy when they arrive and emerges sparkling clean. You go in the mikvah clean and you come out having gone through a spiritual process that's helpful for you.
It's really important to hear. I'm interested in how kind of expectations around mikvah experience are so, for me, at least in my experience, and also what I've heard from both women and men, is that there are lots of expectations around, you mentioned that you had this restorative and helpful experience in your infertility journey. But for some people, that experience is the opposite. It's a reminder of their infertility. It's an experience of shame that they haven't conceived, or it's an experience of shame for other reasons. But in terms of the good stuff, what are people to expect? Because I think because it's shrouded in this realm of spirituality, of purity, there's an expectation that you come out the mikveh and you're a new person, and you're different and everything's changed. So as someone in the audience can say has never been to mikveh before, what would you tell them to expect when they jumped out, fresh and clean?
So I think part of the challenge of this is that going to the mikveh in and of itself won't do very much unless you have thought about it, prepared for it, and potentially, as we hope to at the Mikvah Project, have a guide with you who can take you on that journey that you need it to be, because everyone's going to need something different, but ultimately it's this sense of a space where you can be vulnerable, where you can be yourself, where the liturgy can speak to what you need it to speak to. I suppose what the tachlis of the basics of what you can expect is that we would expect people to, as much as they are comfortable with, strip back to the basics of who they are. So makeup off, jewelry off, hair down, brushed, use the bathroom, have a shower, be clean. Tradition, there are different minhagim about how one immerses. It tends to range from 3 dips to 7, but actually you could do other things too. I really like the model of 3, and I try and frame it as having cover knots, having intentions for, during your first dip, something about the past and what you're leaving behind, maybe what you're washing away. For the second dip, to think about the future. What does this moment open up? What are you hoping to move towards? To be intentional about those things. And the third dip is about being present in the now. A lot of formulations have past, present, future. I like to finish in the present, and just to help people be mindful of where they are, the experience of being in the water, all those sorts of things.
Completely, yeah. That intention going in seems so vital, because you can't just jump in and jump out and expect something to impact you. It needs to be.
Itself isn't magic.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to hear that. One last question, and this is from me, and it's about the sacrificial element here. So it seems to contrast quite starkly with that private element of dipping. It seems that even though people think this is a private situation, everyone still had to come to the temple and give this offering. How does that play with this private element when you have to openly kind of come and say, I'm giving a sinner offering? Would it be a situation where people wouldn't know what you were doing? Or would it be something that people would be like, oh, he's had a seminal emission, she just had her period, that kind of thing?
But there was no sacrifice for a seminal emission or a period. The sacrifice...
Oh, sorry, the Zav and the Zava. Yeah.
But if you were sick, and yes, maybe there is a sense of public knowing of those things, but also people would know because you've been isolated and quarantined. I mean, I think the reality is when we look at the sacrificial system, there would have been so many reasons to take sacrifices each day that maybe people didn't need to know the details of why you were going. But it's also likely that these kind of diseases were quite common and quite frequently spread, although we don't really know. But yeah, I think for me as a progressive Jew, the loss of that sacrificial temple isn't a great loss. But I think acknowledging that it allowed people to express something about the lives they lived and to mark moments is really powerful. But it's also really freeing to be able to say, Mikvah today is not about purity and impurity, because that system is gone. And therefore, as rabbinic Judaism has spent 2,000 years doing, this is about unpacking the spiritual beauty underneath these rituals and underneath this system, without the temple parts of it.
Totally. I think that's really beautiful that we can bring Mikvah into today. And I want to just share with our audience, this is Mikvah is something that one can connect with whoever they are, and it's so clear that Mikvah Project is going to hopefully achieve that, as creating a space where everyone can feel welcome with ritual immersion, with Mikvah. And it's really unexpected to see that. I think people's perception of Mikvah will have changed after listening to this. So thank you, Rabbi Debbie. Thank you to our audience on the webinar, on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you are in the world. Shabbat Shalom from JW3. And thank you, Rabbi Debbie.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.